Hello, welcome to staircasepod at gmail.com /staircasepod at gmail.com. That's our podcast, staircasepod at gmail.com. Right before the call, I was reminded it reminds you guys to know what our email is so that you can send in your thoughts and prayers and everything in between to this podcast called staircasepod at gmail.com. That's the official name of our podcast.
The kids don't know what emails are these days. We have to remind them.
You can slide into our LinkedIn. Well, my name's David. I'm one of our hosts here on staircasepod at gmail.com. And I'm excited to be joined by two beige-wearing men today. It looks like you're both wearing beige today. Let's pick Beige Man 1. Beige Man 1, go ahead.
I was pointed to. Beige Man 1 speaking. This is Sam. Glad to be here. I'll pass it to my brother in beige.
Hello. The lighting looks beige. However, the shirt is gray.
Oh.
So I resent the title Beige Man 2 because I'm Gray Man 1.
Well, I'm wearing gray.
What? That looks black.
Oh, the lighting is atrocious here, I guess.
Yes. All of our audio listeners are so intrigued by the shades of our shirts, I'm sure.
Yes. Well, my name is Noah, Grayman1, and staircasepod at gmail.com.
Welcome to staircasepod at gmail.com, your favorite ministry and culture podcast. Today, Noah's going to have a great conversation with us about the church. Can you believe that? We're going to talk about the church today?
We're talking about the church today, you guys.
Believe it or not. We can't shut up about it. We love it. It's just
okay. So I sent you guys this link to this YouTube video, and we'll also put it in the description today, but it's from one of my favorite YouTubers, City Beautiful. And, you know, I'm into all these urbanist kind of city planning YouTubes. And this one has a very intriguing title called Can Churches End the Housing Crisis? Yigby, which means yes in God's backyard. And so I sent it to you guys because I figured that we would have some pretty good thoughts on it. David having grown up in a parsonage and Sam being at the forefront of the affordable housing crisis. And so I'll just describe briefly kind of the point that's made in the video. And then I really just want us to kind of talk through some of the pros and cons of doing something like this. So you guys down for that?
Love it.
Yes, chef.
Yes, chef. Okay, so in the video, he talks about this church in Madison, Wisconsin called St. John's Lutheran. And they have a large building.
In Wisconsin? No way.
Yep, there are churches in Wisconsin. They've got a large building, as many older mainline churches do, and their congregation is smaller and older. And they have a heart for their neighborhood, and they want to do something about the affordable housing crisis. And so they are going to tear down their building, and they're going to build a high-rise with 110 units of affordable housing, and the first floor of the building is going to be their church. And so they're building a new sanctuary, a new worship space, new offices. They're also going to have like rental space for other organizations to rent, and that's going to be the whole first floor of the apartment building. So like instead of doing like retail storefronts with like the nail salon and a restaurant, they're just doing church on the main floor. And then it's going to be all affordable housing units above, reserved for people making a specific percentage of the median income in the area. And so they're wanting to do this. They're working to do it. They're raising money currently to do it if you're interested in donating. But the video is talking about how other churches around the country are prohibited from doing this because of zoning laws, and how so many churches are in neighborhoods that are zoned that you can only build
What's a zoning law? Is that a basketball term?
Exactly. So like a law that says what you're allowed to build on the land. So a lot of neighborhoods, you only can build single family houses, and that's why the neighborhood is all single family houses, and there's no stores, corner stores, convenience stores, restaurants, gas stations, industrial waste facilities, all those things banned, right? But there's a lot of churches there, And he talks about one specific project in California that was the first apartment building built in a neighborhood that was affordable in over 30 years because a church chose to turn their land into housing. And so I wanted to turn it over to you guys. What are your initial thoughts on a plan like this to tear down a historic building that is no longer serving the purpose that it was intended for when, it was built for a congregation of 500 and is down to about 30 people in a neighborhood that has a lot of people that need an affordable place to live? Pros, cons, thoughts, feedback. Housing expert Sam Carroll.
Man, can I rephrase the question or ask a slightly different question that I would like to throw out? What is the point of a church building in the United States in 2026, the year of our Lord? Because I feel like that is like the overarching underlying question that we should be asking as like ministers, church culture people. And I think we get to this conversation, but like, I'm sitting here thinking like, what is the point of having a building as a church that currently operates in a building? Like all of us are in churches that operate in buildings.
Yeah. And have made intentional choices about our buildings. In fact.
Yeah. Yeah. And to go first a little bit, like I think about the idea or like the concept of like being a public witness and
That's
like,
good.
You're doing church in public. So your building is a reflection of what you believe about the gospel. Right. And how how you use your space, the type of the space you own and stuff. If we're privileged enough to live in a society and a culture that allows us to have, do church in public, then our church building should be a part of our public witness to the community, in some ways. And I think it's like on that, for people who have questions about faith or curious about faith, church buildings offer that, that front door that a lot like, some other church movements don't have, where we feel this tension doing like, home groups and stuff. It's like, it's a lot easier to invite somebody sometimes to like a church, a brick and mortar building than to say, why don't you just show up at this address at 7:00 and just knock on the door and be invited? You know what I mean? Like sometimes, I love that stuff, but there's like a unique thing that's offered with that. So I want to ask that question. Like, what is the point of why not just, what's the point of having a church building as we kind of start this conversation? What else would you guys add to that as we arrive there?
David's
like, I don't think we should have one.
I'm collecting my thoughts. I don't want to be the devil's advocate the whole show, and my temptation is to do that. Spoiler alert, I suppose. So to answer your question on like the purpose of the building, it's a very complex one. In the strictest sense, it's like if you go to the most basic definition, it's I would say like a house of worship, right? A place to do your worship services, and then and or to do your ministry, in the strictest sense. But then I even think, looking at church history, that you bring in the point of architecture and like sacred architecture and, the building reflecting creation and telling the story. And we've definitely moved away from that in modern American churches, but like the Eastern Orthodox uses how they build their building to tell stories about who God is.
Yeah, beautifully.
Yeah.
It's a home.
Yeah, I mean, David, you and I go to churches that like used to be warehouses.
Buildings, yeah.
So I don't think that that's the intent of our buildings. But I think, Sam, that's a really important philosophical question that often gets overlooked, because it's just like, well, a church, you think of a building. So of course a church has a building, right? But it's important for us to consider. I think, the alternatives can be tricky. Like then you're doing set up and tear down for worship services, which a lot of plants do, and then get to a point after a few years of, I don't want to do this anymore, setting up and tearing down all the sound equipment and chairs in a high school cafeteria every week, loading and unloading trailers and stuff like that, having a place that they can meet on Wednesday nights or midweek. But yeah, I liked what you said about public witness. I like what David has said in the past about like an investment in the community. Like a church building shows a congregation like spending money on a neighborhood and saying like this is our home. Like the difference between renters and owners. Like it's a church saying we are owners
I don't
here.
think I said anything that intelligent.
Oh, David, I have heard you say intelligent things once or twice in the past.
15 years ago.
No, you were saying that about your church building in Noblesville, like how it was an expensive building that a country congregation came together to build and show their investment in that little corner on the country roads. And like they built staircases that now go into brick walls. And
that's the name of the show.
And so that's why we have to evaluate, like, is this building serving its purpose? And I kind of love what Madison did here, this St. Luke's in Madison, to say, like, or is it St. John's?
I think it was St. John's.
Oh, St. Matthew's? St. Mark's. Definitely St. John's. So at St. John's in Madison, they said, like, we have a building that fits 500 and we are 20 people. And there's people that are homeless in our neighborhood. And so why don't we use our building for the purpose that the community needs? And it's interesting, like, in looking at their plans, like, they're beautiful new blueprints of the buildings, but there's not going to be any children's wing. And I think that's kind of like not very forward thinking of them. Like it sounds like they're building for their current congregation and not for let's grow and we're going to have new families living above us and like the new opportunities that we're going to have to revitalize. And like, so I think that is like a kind of disappointing thing there, that they don't necessarily see themselves growing again, it seems like. But I like that they're saying we've got this space that God has given us and we need to use it for others. So like that's another important purpose of a church building. Like, how do we use it? Not just for ourselves as like a clubhouse for our church, but for the mission and for serving others. Yeah.
So I'll jump in and talk a little bit, like some of my thoughts. Y'all might be surprised that I'm not so gun-ho on like, we should tear down all the churches and build affordable housing. Like, I don't think that's
your job.
I know, but I wrestle with this and I've changed my views and I might still change my views. I reserve that right. But like, I think that there's something special about some sort of sacred space that we like, I don't know, like that we worship in and sit under the teaching of the word. And so anyway, so that we'll come back to that. Like one, I do think that the church is uniquely positioned in the world to be a part of solving the world's problems, right? Because we have the truest answer, like to sin, death, poverty, suffering, all that stuff. Like we're as the community of God, we have a lot to say about that. And I think that especially in America, where the church is unique and that it does hold a lot of property and could probably leverage that property to better meet the needs of people in the community. Now, I don't think, but that's like, just thinking about like, just me thinking about Louisville, like I think it would be important to think very strategically about like how you do that on a large scale and understanding like what are the biggest area of needs, what congregations can like, leverage their property to do that. But I do think that there's something special about, even like in the context that I'm in and like that we're in, I think that there's something special about people going to a church building, to like, even people who have not been in church for a while, who are curious or something. I think there's something special about like being present on a Sunday morning in a in something that feels familiar, that is like, yes, I'm here. I'm not just like, in a room on the bottom floor of an apartment complex. Can God use those rooms? Absolutely. But I don't know. I feel like somewhat sentimental, or like, or still holding on to some of that. So I think on a meta level, I'm like, yeah, I think the church in America could be doing a better job at leveraging, leaning into our calling and leveraging like our assets to meet the needs of our communities. But I don't know if we should all just totally tear down our buildings and build apartment complexes, because there's something about coming into the house of God to like, worship and be together that I think is special. I don't think it should be an idol. Like, I think maybe that's a question. Like, like, yeah, I don't know. So I'll stop talking, but those are my first thoughts.
I'll highlight a few things you said. And I'm with you on the need for sacred space, right? And I'm also with you on the need for like public knowing that it's a church building. Mm-hmm. But I think the example of St. John's in Madison is doing both of those things. And I texted you actually a screenshot that shows their church building that they're building. And it looks to me exactly like David or my church building.
It does.
A warehouse. Yeah.
It's a warehouse with walls. And it's just the first floor of a apartment, which is always, 2 stories. And so it's going to be like taller, and it's going to be square and boxy and black and no windows. And it'll be exactly like so many like church buildings today. And I can only imagine that the front of this church is going to have a beautiful sign saying St. John's Lutheran.
Yeah.
And then it just so happens to have apartments above it. And it's on a street level that's going to have a great sidewalk. They're going to make sure that the sidewalks are good. So in some ways, it might be more accessible to people than the old building was. And it'll still have parking in a garage. So, like, for those reasons that you were saying, they are going to lose a traditional church building with the steeple, but they're going to have a building that is no different than the one that David inhabits in an old factory, or that my church inhabits in an old furniture store. The difference is just that there's apartments that are on top of it. But this space is still being built specifically for a church building. They even have a room marked sacristy and vestry. So that's more than my church has.
That's some church words right there.
Yeah. David, what do you think?
Yeah, I'll bring... Well, grumpy old David will come in now.
Yeah.
So here's where my hesitation comes in, is uneasy entanglements. I'm uneasy about unnecessary entanglements, in the sense of you're creating, which I'm all for social networks, but you're also creating some complex networks. First and most complex is BlackRock is going to own half your building.
Oh gosh.
Grumpy David. Let's go.
Right? So I mean, I know firsthand, I've been a part of several churches. We barely had the money to put a new roof on the building, right?
Yeah.
Let alone to either add on, like, so the church I'm currently at, we can't afford to put 6 more stories on top of it, or to tear it down and build a new. So you're going to have to find funding.
Yes, exactly.
Who's going to fund that?
Well, on this, I would say, like, more than likely, there's if you're building subsidized housing, or using housing that like is voucher accessible, then you're probably able to get either. There's all sorts of different housing vouchers that would probably these units are probably being filled in these church buildings by folks who are getting some type of assistance from different government agencies. But I think what raises so the church is bringing in money, probably ideally to break even or something, from the rent that's coming in from these, from all these tenants, I would assume.
But I'm saying putting up the capital to build the $5
something
million
I would throw out is that
I'm sorry.
Yeah, and I would have
50
so now
million.
we're getting Yeah. Now we're getting in the weeds, but that's, I think, a great point of like talking about entanglements. Like, in my mind, a perfect world is like you as a church build this and you assume the risk of saying we could operate at zero occupancy. Like if nobody was renting, like we would still be okay or something like that. Like you're not financially dependent on those, those apartments being occupied, so that you're not putting yourself in a bind financially or you're getting yourself into a financial commitment where, having people leased up is more important than, performing the ministry of the church, because that's how your buildings I could see that getting dicey if you're like, now you've overextended to yourself to you're really just a landlord more than you are anything else, because that's the thing that has become your priority as one potential pitfall.
So if you remember the church economics book I talked about, it talked about having like 3 kind of organizations in a church, a community development organization, and then like a for-profit business arm that's like using the church assets. Like churches that are doing projects like this, like the one in Madison, Wisconsin, has created a separate company that is actually like doing the fundraising and like will manage the project. And so like they created a company that's called More for Madison. And it says it's an initiative of St. John's Lutheran, but it's a separate entity in the sense that they can apply for like the grants that come with building this kind of housing. Yeah. So like there is like funding that's available for building. There's also like developers that are going to want to build this kind of thing, and they can get loans. So I don't think that the church is going to take on the financial responsibility as much. But you're right. This is very complicated, and like 3 pastors don't have any of this. Like we don't have this skill set in real estate deals. And I'm sure that's also a big like thing that a lot of churches might be like, well, I don't know how to do any of this, and I was never trained in this in seminary. And so a lot of the church leaders are probably like, we're not going to pursue anything like that because it just sounds too complicated.
Well, and I think something that would be a hang up is you can't control who moves into your building. Like you can't, if it's you don't have any, there's all sorts of protections for people. So like there's people who you might fundamentally disagree with on like on all sorts of levels that, your for-profit company would still have to rent to, and have as a tenant. Now, I think that's a great thing. And I think that's a great thing. And as somebody who has my foot in scattered site transitional housing, it's an incredibly complicated and stressful thing to have people in apartments that are, struggling to figure some stuff out. Like that can bring a lot of headaches and things like that. So there's a lot of risk that you assume as an organization if you open yourself up to that. Now, I think that's a good and just thing? Probably. Go ahead, David.
Well, I was even thinking of it's difficult to be a landlord, right? In the sense of, at some point you're going to have to kick someone out of their home, and they're not going to think, oh, this holding company is the one that kicked me out of my home. It's the church.
It's the church. Yeah.
Right. And so I think those are like, that's a real thing you'd have to consider is there will be a tenant that you will have to kick out. And so, yes, you can make it abundantly clear this is such and such company that did this, but that doesn't mean anything if it's a ministry of something church. And I think I keep going.
Sounds messy.
I keep going back to, and maybe this is like I'm more aware of it in the sense of not owning the building that you worship in has strings attached to it, right? In the sense of, so let's play one out. Is Saint something's church would have to sell their land to this development company, right? Because the development company is not going to put forward $50 million if they don't own the land outright, right? Like their whole thing is finances. So my church would have to sell my land to that company. And so I would become a probably a permanent tenant of the first floor. But the problem is that's what happened with the United Methodist Church, right? The church that we've talked about in this show before, where local congregations were practically tenants of the buildings that they'd been occupying for 150 plus years. And when you're a tenant, you have different rights than an owner, right? And so let's say that this development company puts forward $50 million, and they can be shrewd and cunning in the way that they write the program or write the contract. And if you have different political ideologies, theological ideologies, if you say something or do something that that company disagrees with, all I'm saying is you'd have to be very cautious and hire a very good lawyer when going to bed with a development company is where my hesitation is. Now, if a church can independently fundraise and independently come up with, if you have an independently wealthy congregation that can come up with $50 million to build a high-rise building, I'm all for it. It's mine is, as we were talking about before the call, of money corrupts people, right? And so when you put millions of dollars on the line, I don't assume the best in people, and I would not assume the best in different organizations, that this wouldn't be an easy way to take advantage of that local congregation and just turn it into a high rise. So
yeah, or could potentially evict the congregation for holding views that are unpopular socially around marriage and abortion and whatnot, and they'd just as well renovate that first floor to have income generating retail shops.
Yeah,
so that's possible.
An organization that would actually be an interesting comparable to this is looking at Habitat for Humanity in the work that they do to help people. They're focused on home building and home ownership, but one of the things I think, just talking about the principles that they would argue for, is that who better to have as a landlord than a Christian landlord? Who better to have, especially for folks who are coming out of poverty or needing assistance, in navigating their way out of financial difficulty or relational difficulty. Something that Habitat for Humanity does really well is you don't have to be a Christian to participate in their service, but they come with a very high standard and very for that they hold their participants to, and they give people tools, resources, and walk alongside them very lovingly in helping them grow in their financial maturity and their home, their independent living skills and stuff like that, to be good homeowners. So I think about them as a model for how to do affordable housing as a Christian organization, as truly a beacon. Book plug. Their founder wrote a book called The Theology of the Hammer. That's just kind of all about their origin and how it's a very short read. But it's a good one. Just about their organization and stuff. But yeah, that's something that they do really well. And I think, so coming from the side of how could this work in a positive way, is I think I do think the church is uniquely, the church has something unique to say in this space and something unique to offer in this space, that I think historically in America, we just haven't focused on that. We haven't focused on, we haven't been focused as much as building homeless shelters and hospitals and stuff. We're not doing
needs.
that. Yeah. We're not doing that as much as we once were. And I think that this church is just proving that there's some pretty creative ways to not, and everybody gets scared of the social gospel and going too far. And I get that, not swing the pendulum too far to where we lose the plot of why we're doing this. But yeah, I think this stuff does get me excited because it gets me thinking outside the box of, what does God want us to do in our cities? And what has he given us? It's having it's the parable of the talents. What has he been giving you and how are you going to use it? David, you have your finger raised.
Yeah. I wanted to also give some context about, because Noah's alluded to it. So the church that I got married in and I'm currently a member at is a massive factory. The building is owned by the church outright. And I've been talking with the pastor there, and there's some conversations of like, they only use about a quarter of the building. And so we've been talking, and like, for example, in our community, one of the biggest needs is like employment and like manufacturing level employment. And so,
which is what that building used to be. It was the factory that employed most of the town.
Yep. And so the cool thing is the church staff and board is working with like some realtors and stuff like that of like, it's one of those where it's going to actually serve two purposes. One, it'll help cover our mortgage if the, half the building is rented. And two, it would create decent paying jobs in the area in the sense of manufacturing. And so I hope you hear, like, I'm all for finding ways to be, a useful part of the community. I think I'm just I think like, and that's where I'm like, it's such a cool opportunity because we could create good paying jobs, which have eluded this area of the country, and it would help the church. Like it's a mutually beneficial thing. I think I'm apprehensive on, just like I said before, what are the partnerships and who are you betting with? That's always going to be my concern. And so making sure that you can be companies or groups that are mutually beneficial and have a common goal is all for it. And so that's where I even like, I know some churches that have created like co-working spaces and things like that to help use their empty space to bring people and give opportunities for folks who wouldn't normally have it. So I don't know. I just wanted to add that piece to it.
Yeah. Well,
David is not opposed to creatively making money with church.
Yeah. Well, I think it would be wise. I think it would be wise for us to remember our Lord, who turned over tables in the temple and said, you made my Father's house a den of thieves. And like, this is supposed to be a place of prayer and not like, I do think being weary of, because with all of this comes the temptation to be, we say it like, all of it comes the temptation to maybe make more money than we need to. What if we actually could turn a profit here and not just break even for the sake of the gospel? And like, is it this encroachment of like, I think we could do it. It just has to be, we have to be very humble and wise and seeking the Lord on all those things. Cause I've seen it in the nonprofit space, how people it can sneak in and you're like, well, I'm just doing a little bit more, or we're going to get a little bit of this. And then, like it would be easy for all of a sudden the church to become a money making, tool for people or an organization. And Jesus has some very harsh things to say about that. So I think just acknowledging that temptation, I'm not saying they're trying to do that, but like it gets a lot more real when you start introducing, those components too.
Millions.
So, yes.
But I think that story, it's important to recognize it's not about like, any form of making money in the church is wrong, but the way
I'm not
exploiting people.
Yes,
and
the exploitation. Yes.
Yeah, and then that might even bring it around the other direction of like, if we're in a neighborhood that has so much need and we have a building we barely use, are we now exploiting, or like not using our resources God's given us in the right way? And like, if there is a housing crisis and if we do have an opportunity in this space, I'll give you a different example that's actually really close to home for me. In Atlanta, there's this neighborhood of Atlanta called Kirkwood, and there's a church there called Turner Monumental AME Church, African Methodist Episcopal Church, and they're not trying to tear down any building to build affordable housing. They have an empty plot of land, and they're trying to turn this empty plot of land next door to their building into supportive housing units. And Kirkwood is a really interesting neighborhood because it was really great streetcar suburb of Atlanta that was totally segregated, only white. And then when it was forced to be integrated, all the white people moved away. And so then it became an all black neighborhood, and it had no investment in the community. The streets like decayed. There was no like city maintenance really, and a lot of underinvestment in the homes, and things really declined. But this church was there the whole time. And now it's become trendy, gentrified, extremely expensive. And a lot of those families, the black families, have been priced out. And there's even people who are homeless in Kirkwood who historically lived in Kirkwood like their whole lives. And they don't want to move away because this is their neighborhood. But now families who have much more income are living there because it's close to the city and all these great things. So this church, which is a black church in a neighborhood that is now gentrifying white again, is trying to build low-income housing, and the neighborhood is revolting. They have been freaking out and saying you can't do it, and so the church has been changing their plans to be more agreeable to the community, and they're going to do a 55 plus apartment complex instead of low income, and 55 plus is just easier to get built by neighborhoods because people prefer seniors to poor people.
Senior housing is still a need. It's still important.
Yes. And it definitely is a need. And yeah, but there's just been a lot of controversy in the neighborhood. And this is like September of 2025. There were community meetings and lots of issues with people in the neighborhood not wanting the church to build this housing on their own land that they owned, and trying to block it as like a neighborhood committee when the neighborhood committee doesn't technically have any power over it, and it has to be like approved by the city of Atlanta. And I haven't heard otherwise that the city of Atlanta is not approving it. But just very interesting to see like a neighborhood push back against it. The neighborhood is all single family houses, and this will be an apartment complex with multiple stories. And people are concerned about safety, that they're going to bring poor and dangerous people into the neighborhood. And the church has like written like a letter to the whole community, just open letter of like why we're doing this, and also kind of talking a little bit about the history here. And like, you might be new to this neighborhood, but we've been here since 1899. And and we were here through challenging times. And yeah, so just very interesting the way that a neighborhood would like push back against a church doing something like this on land that it owns.
Well, we have a Yes in God's Backyard bill in our Kentucky like legislator that's working on being passed. And in my spaces, there's a lot of people who are not like excited about it because they don't trust churches to be responsible. And like they don't trust that. I mean, these are all non-Christians like that have their hackles up a little bit, but like they don't like the bill because they think it just gives churches more building power than like they won't actually do good with the ability, which I think is one is like a sad assessment, but you argue a fair assessment. Noah, going back to your point of like, you guys already have buildings that sit empty 6 days a week. What do you need? Are you really is this the thing that's going to let you finally make an impact in the community? Why wouldn't you, leverage your space before then or something? And I'm not saying we have to answer to all of quote unquote those people, but yeah, there's more than one reason people would be pushing back against this. It's like, have churches in America proven themselves trustworthy with, to meet the needs of their communities and stuff. So
I even wonder what the crowd who is, against the church being a tax exempt status, like they probably are against
Yeah.
it too. So
Yeah.
just be curious to see. I just looked it up. Indiana, there's a movement in Indiana as well.
Working on it.
Yeah.
I would say, in way of like, for me, just kind of wrapping it up or like putting some final thoughts to my things is like, I think the church is well positioned and should be engaging this issue. I think that there probably are vacant spaces or underutilized spaces that could be turned into affordable housing or community centers or daycares or something, like, understand what a community needs and like, let's think outside the box. But I do think that there's like something special about sacred space and something about, just the church building and discipling kids and families and stuff that can take place uniquely in a church building. So yeah, it's interesting to see all these different communities doing stuff, because I'm not going to like act like I've got it figured out, but it's cool. So yeah.
And I think it comes down to every community has to know what is right for their local context.
Yeah.
Like, it's a very contextual question. The churches around the world are having very different conversations, but for our country, which has so many buildings and so many congregations that are smaller or closing, and also so much need for housing, like, it is kind of a special moment that we have right now to consider, like, how can we use the real estate that we have for kingdom purposes. And that'll look different in every city around the country. So like, if you're in a small town in Indiana and you're confused, why would we need to do this in our space when there's acres of fields or whatever?
Or empty houses.
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. Like that there's houses that people could live in here, then yeah, maybe not the best use. But in a neighborhood like Kirkwood, that a single family house of 1,200 square feet is going for $800,000 or more, and families are getting priced down and ending up on the street or having to move out of their hometown. Like, yeah, I love seeing a church say we are going to do something about it. And I think that neighborhoods should support it, even if it seems a little different than what's already been done.
I'm going to add one funny thing. There'll be like 3 or 5 people who might listen to this and think, wait a second. I have been trying to get our church has a gatehouse. So I have been trying to turn that into an efficiency apartment. So
it's tiny.
I'm also not against it. I just like, I need people to know. I think that'd be a great use of our tiny, it's like an 800 square foot little building. Be a great little efficiency apartment. And I think we could take on that financial burden to do that. So I am not against churches coming up with housing accommodations and things like that. I don't know why I'm adding this asterisk, but I felt it necessary.
Well, it sounds like David has been campaigning for this, so he needs to be sure people know. He's not backing down on that. He's like, this is still a good idea.
David wants to live in the gatehouse.
That's been sitting empty. My mom used it as her office when the building was not.
We get it. You get it. We're cutting you off. Any final things, boys? It's a fun conversation. It's interesting.
Thanks for watching Urbanist YouTube with me and talking about it. It was a fun intersection of church and real estate and housing. And so interested to hear your thoughts on staircasepod@gmail.com. Do you have a creative way you could use your church building? Do you want to do something similar for affordable housing in your community? Let us know.
If we don't have church buildings, where are the youth going to play sardines? I mean, come on. What are we going to do?
And who is Jesus's dad?
Well, thanks for listening. Glad you could join us on this Staircase to Nowhere.
Bye.